And I don't like it when I press a key and I get no feedback. Doesn't that bother you? It's terrible design, user interface design, to not do that. So I'm going to do system.out.println. What should I say? Your model has been saved to model.json. That makes me feel a little better. There's some good design. Build. Notice how I build and I run a lot. If you're not building and running a lot, you're doing it wrong. Okay. If I hit save now, it's been saved. Cat model.json, there's my simple model with nothing in it. Now, what happens if I add a lot of tubes? Okay, now I have a lot of tubes, and I hit the letter S. Boom. Okay. Oh, I think it showed up in that text editor. Now I'm going to look at my model, and there it is. I have a big complex model with lots of tubes in it. It's kind of what I expected, right? So we can now save, and it looks reasonable. The only way we'll know if it's really reasonable is if we can load it again, but so far I think I've done half of that task. Do you agree? You want to do the other task? Let's at least get started, just because I think this is a challenging thing to do. Okay. Where was I? I guess let's start with the controller. Let's see if C is L for load, right? And for right now, I'm just going to say, you pressed L, as if we didn't know. That'll make sure that code works. Here's the thing, as I thought about this a little bit more, I told somebody to write a constructor that would cause the whole model that would construct a new model. And the more I thought about that, oops, wrong one. Where's my model? How could you get model.java mixed up with model.json? Okay, if we write a constructor like this, what's going to happen is in order to load from disk, we're going to make a whole new model, right? If we get a new model, well, then we have to take the old model and throw it out and put in the new model. And there's a bit of hooking up that has to happen because the game has a model and the controller has a model and the view also has a model. So after we make a new model, we're going to have to tell the game, hey game, here's your new model, and it'll have to point to this new one instead. And hey controller, point to this new one instead. And hey view, point to this new one instead. And that's a bit of work. I think we can think our way into a better design. What if we just tell the model, hey, load yourself, and it'll just kind of rip out the model's old guts and stick in the model's new guts, and it'll just be the same model. You see how that's a little bit easier? At least from an architectural point of view. That way we won't have to rehook up all these connections. And so that keeps our design a little simpler. So instead of making a constructor, which happens when you make a brand new object, a new model, I'm just going to make a method here called void unmarshal JSON obj. What that's going to do is it's going to take the JSON object and unmarshal itself into the model and just replace whatever's in the model, replace its guts, by which I mean this array list of tubes, with the one that comes from the disk. You follow that? Okay. Before I write this function, wouldn't it be nice if tubes had a way to unmarshal themselves? I'm going to use the constructor approach for this one. So I'm going to go to my model.json, my json.java file, copy this silly submarine example, back to my model, twink. Obviously, I don't want a submarine, I want a tube. The tube will be constructed from a JSON object. And here's what it'll do. It will say, x is equal to what? Ob.get int. Where's an integer example? There it is. Int ob.get long, apparently. Integers are called longs when they're saved in longer format than integers in JSON. And I called it x, right? Okay. And y is equal to int ob.get long. Y. I have now made a constructor which, given a tube JSON object, will unmarshal a tube. You follow that? Those are the things I put in it, so those are the same things I should expect to get back out of it. Okay. Now, let's do the... actually, I don't need to return anything. The way constructors work is kind of weird. They're the only types of methods that don't have return values. Constructors, the object itself is kind of the returned value. In my opinion, it's a weird design, but object-oriented languages have been doing it for years, and now it's kind of the standard. Okay, let's write this unmarshal method. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say array list of tube new list equals new array list of tube. Basically, I made a new array list, and it's going to be the new one that's going to stomp over this old one right here. Okay? Let's go look at the example. How do we do that? That's the part I need. Okay, JSON, let's get the JSON list out of that thing. Is obj.get, what did I call it? Tubes. Okay, for int I equals 0, I is less than JSON list dot size I plus plus. I'm going to visit all the things in my JSON object. And for everyone, I'm going to say new list dot add new tube of JSON list dot get I. Now, I'm sure I did that too fast for you to think about it, and that's no good. You need to think about it, because you really do need to understand this stuff. Basically, I had a JSON object, and it's a big array of other JSON objects. I need to visit every single one of them and turn them all into tubes. How do I know they're tubes? Well, I made it, and the only thing I stuck in there were tubes, so they better be. I'm kind of assuming they are. If they're not, something bad's going to happen. But at the moment, I think they are. Yeah.
Does your new list variable name does not have to match your public variable tubes? They should be tubes.
At the moment, this code will do absolutely nothing. But I'm going to add one more line that says tubes is equal to new list, and now I'm done. Basically, I made a new list and filled it up with tubes before I stomped over my old list. You know what? That would be so much easier if I just used the actual list. This would be the exact same thing as if I just do that. Then I don't even have to do any of that. I like small and clean. So this is, I think, what you were saying, right? So right here, when I say list equals new array list of tube, that line is going to take this array list and throw it out the window. No matter how many tubes were in it, no matter, it could have had 50 tubes in it. But as soon as I say tubes equals new array list, or list equals new array list of tube, now I've got a brand new list with nothing in it. Then I'm going to find my list of JSON tubies, and for each one, I'm going to turn them into tubes and put them in my list. Does it make sense what I did? Okay. Well, unmarshal. Now I got to come down to my controller. What am I doing here? You pressed L. Instead of that, I want to do something like JSON-J equals JSON.load model.json. So I'm going to load that file into a big tree of JSON objects, and then I'll call model.unmarshalledj. So file into document object model to my model. Do you follow that logic? Okay. Now I've done a lot more coding than I should have done without doing some testing. I can do that because I've been coding for years. You shouldn't do that. You should compile every 2 lines of code that you write. You should compile all the time, and you should run as frequently as you possibly can, and you should write as many unit tests as you can think of, because every last one will save you lots of work. Okay. I build. What I just said is, do what I say, not as I do. I'm a terrible teacher, aren't I? Okay, so model Java line 81. I have a bug. Let's learn how to read these. This is where the bug is. This is the problem. It cannot find a symbol. There's a little caret pointing at list. Is that what it can't find? Well, right here it says symbol variable list. So yeah, that's the thing it can't find. It doesn't know what list is at model.java line 81. We go to model.java, Control G to go to line 81. Here we are. It's saying, hey, what the heck is a list? Now I thought list was the name of our array list. It's tubes. Why did I think it was list? Okay, that's what I meant. Try again. I always fix only one error at a time and rebuild after every single one. Why? Because sometimes when you fix one error, it wipes out 3 of your error messages, and I don't like wasting my time. Okay. Incomparable types, char and string. You cannot compare a C to a string of L. Controller Java line 46. Yeah, I see you guys know how to deal with that one. See what I did wrong? I used double quotes instead of single quotes. Single quotes means a char, double quotes means a string. A string is an array of chars. You can't compare an array of things to just an element of a thing. So, no good reason. Both would work equally well. Because if I pressed S, I obviously didn't press L, so the logic works out the same either way. Let's do it this way. The nice thing about else if is then the computer doesn't have to check the second condition. So I think it's actually slightly itty bitty faster internally. And if you're worried about that, you're wasting your time, because your time matters, the computer's time doesn't. Computers are fast these days. So don't get worked up about tiny efficiencies like that. But I think else if might be slightly faster if anybody cares. Okay, did it just build? It did. Wow, did I do the whole thing? Let's find out. Okay, here's my game. Let's make a cool tube pattern. And one over there. Okay, now I'll press S. Your model has been saved, and I'll close it. Now I'll run my game again. And now I'm going to press L. Ready? Drum beat. Dink. Ooh. And it still works. And I can save it, close it, and run it, and load it, and wipe out some tubes, and load it again, and save it, make some changes, and load it again. And now I have a usable map editor. It's a pretty lame map editor. All I can do is tubes, but you know, I'm getting started. Now, if you really wanted to make it cool, maybe I could right-click and it could cycle between tubes and bricks and turtles and Goombas and everything else. Or maybe I could use my keyboard. But basically, if you can do this much, you could write a whole darn elegant, cool game map editor, could you not? And if you were to integrate that with a nice painting program, you've pretty much turned it into some type of a game generator, right? Well, and you need a game engine, but that's going to come next. Do you see we're going places with this? Okay. Now the main thing I want you to get in your head is what's going on in memory. There were a lot of objects, and in order to get that, you really need to spend a little time going through and looking at code and thinking about what it means. Because what it means is we're making objects all over the place. There's tube objects and JSON objects and model objects, and they're all referencing each other. And you've got to keep straight in your head what they all are and where they're all going. If you can do that, you get object-oriented programming. And if you get object-oriented programming, that's pretty much the biggest hurdle en route to becoming a great programmer, in my opinion. In other words, that whole thing stopping people from making the big bucks and being programmers and having the power of creation is really keeping their head wrapped around objects. So if you get this assignment, I think you're most of the way there. Yes?
I'm having trouble loading the individual tubes object, like the unmarshal model. I'm having trouble like figuring out how to do that.
Okay.
I was trying to follow you a little bit because I'm kind of still a little bit confused and trying to learn it as I go.
Okay.
But I can't in the for loop. How do you make a tube from those two coordinates we put in the?
Okay. Now, so one nice thing is this lecture is recorded, so hopefully by the end of today I should have it posted online, so you can go back and watch it 20 times if you need to. If you have to copy my code, fine, but please try to understand it, because if you're not understanding it, you're missing the point. And if you're getting past this assignment without understanding it, doom and despair awaits you. So, be warned. Having said all that, let me see if I can answer this question. Here we are in the model. The question is, how do I make a tube from
From the coordinates in the JSON.
the coordinates in the JSON? Okay. We're looking at the tube class then. This is the constructor where I do that. This guy says, make a new tube. Why? Because it's a constructor. And all I'm giving it is a JSON object. Now, this is already assuming that is a tube is a JSON object that represents a tube. Assuming I didn't screw up somewhere else, ob is a JSON representation of a tube, and what this constructor is going to do is make a tube. Not a JSON one, but a tube. Okay, a model-y tube. Not the picture of a tube, the model tube. Now, these are the lines that do it. Ob.getLong is going to say, look in that JSON object and find a long of named x. And what that's really doing is looking at, where's test model JSON? So this is an example of a JSON tube. And it's going to say, look for a field named x, and there it is. Or look for a field named y, and there it is. So these names are being mapped to numbers. And that's what's going on right there.